What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. And in this video, we're going to talk about, of course, the most important person on a football team, the head coach. You could certainly argue the general manager, but I think we all agree that Dave Gettleman certainly will be relieved of duty by year's end, whether he retires or whether he's fired. We'll see if it happens before the season ends, but I don't expect him to be back. The major question right now for me as a New York Giants fan is what is going to be the forward direction of this football team? And soon we will find out. I mean, another 5 or 6 weeks, you wait. We'll find out whether or not Joe Judge is going to be back with this team, and we'll find out who is going to be the general manager for the New York Giants. But in this video, I really wanted to dive into what I think are some of the reasons to keep Joe Judge and some of the reasons not to. And in the end, what my decision would be if I was the owner of the New York Giants. As of now, my opinion may change as the season progresses, but I don't think that at this point it's going to. And in the end of the video, I will fully explain why I feel the way that I do. And you guys all know that I'm a guy that wants consistency. I'm a guy that does not want constant turnover, and that is definitely going to be one of the reasons as I talk why I think the New York Giants should at least consider keeping Joe Judge here for a third year, but it's certainly been a mess. Now, yesterday's game, when I really had time to digest it after the game and throughout the day, as a whole, in terms of losing the game, that individual game, was it a game worth flipping out over? In my opinion, no. Were there instances from within the game that you should absolutely be very upset as a fan? Abso-freaking-lutely. And we'll go over some of the things that really bugged me as a fan in that game. But for me, as an individual game, no. But as an individual season, and the totality, obviously, of Dave Gettleman's tenure and this year as a whole with Joe Judge, definitely should leave you holding your head. The reason why I'm not going to flip out over a loss against the Dolphins, we were on the road. The Dolphins are a better team. They had won 4 straight coming in, and we were starting Mike Glennon. And for anybody that thinks that Mike Glennon was going to come in and save the day, well, you got a rude awakening yesterday. The guy is not a good quarterback. He's a career backup for a reason, an average backup at best. And you saw him miss a number of throws in the second half, and you had to at least wonder, regardless of whether or not you hate Daniel Jones, whether or not we would have had a legitimate chance to win that football game had Jones been in the game. I know a lot of you guys are very down on Daniel Jones. I've come out and said that I do not think Daniel Jones is the long-term answer, but he is certainly a major step up than a guy like Mike Glennon. And I think you saw that yesterday in that football game. So it's why I can't really flip that in terms of the losing. Now, in terms of things from within the game, the timeout usage with Joe Judge continues to be a massive problem for me. And you talk about a guy that dots his I's and crosses his T's. He says that he's going to be very prepared each and every week, and he doesn't seem to know how to manage timeouts. The other thing, obviously, that we don't like as fans is his conservative nature. Now, I got some people on Twitter telling me that the misusage of his timeout in that game didn't cost the Giants the game. That's not the point. For a guy that's supposed to be intelligent and a guy that's supposed to be prepared, one of the most important things a coach could do from within a game is how he manages his timeouts. They are crucial down the stretch of a football game. Had that game been close, the New York Giants could have absolutely used that timeout at the end of the game. And it's not a one-time occurrence with Judge. We're talking 5, 6 times throughout the year where he's made some very questionable decisions with his timeout usage. And to call a timeout on 2nd and 23 from your own 15-yard line made absolutely no sense. And we're going to get into, that's going to be part of the reason why I think you have to at least consider moving on from Joe Judge. But the main reason why, for the argument in terms of keeping him, the first thing is continuity. Kind of like I hinted at, a couple of minutes ago while I was talking about it. I say it all the time, and I am not a guy that wants a constant turnover rate. Now, the New York Giants, in my opinion, made a huge mistake back in 2019, after the 2019 season, rather, when they did not move on from Dave Gettleman. Had I been the owner, and I'll never be that, I would have kept Gettleman and Shurmur for another year, or I would have fired both at the same time. To have them both on separate timelines, to me, never made a whole world of sense. I understood the argument to keep Shurmur, as I've said several times, because he drafted Daniel Jones to fit his scheme. I also understood moving on from him. But when you moved on from Pat Shurmur, it made very little sense for me to keep Dave Gettleman. What was the argument to keep him at that point once you moved on from Pat Shurmur? You could have had a fresh start then and there. My line of thinking when that happened, if you go back and watch my videos, was that John Mara knew that he screwed up back in 2018, and he didn't give Dave Gettleman a fair opportunity. That's just me speculating. We'll never know the full answer. I thought that he forced Dave Gettleman, Eli Manning on his plate, and did not allow him to start the rebuild, and that was him saying to Dave, I messed up. I'm now going to give you a chance for the new head coach and see if you can get this thing going. But I thought that was the first big mistake. But you look at the problem here with the New York Giants. If you were to move on from Joe Judge, you're now going to be firing 3 head coaches after just 2 years. And what you have to ask yourself as a Giants fan after that, what head coach is going to want to come in and take that situation? Like I always say, you're probably not going to get the cream of the crop. Now, what could attract some guys here? Obviously, 2 first-round picks, probably both going to be in the top 10 at this point. I don't see the New York Giants winning very many football games if you looked at the way that Mike Glennon played, and I assume the way Jake Fromm will play when we get to see him in a week, and we'll see. So that obviously is the big draw. You're going to have 2 early first-round picks. But outside of that, what's the big draw? You've had an owner now that is showing a pattern if you move on from Joe Judge that he is not going to show patience. Like I said, he's fired 3 head coaches just after 2 years if you go on and make this move. So I think that is the first big draw to at least consider keeping Joe Judge. And in the end, if you ask me right now what I think they're going to do, not what I would do, I think they will keep Joe Judge, and I think that is going to be a big reason why. I think when John Mara brought in Joe Judge, he thought that he wanted to bring in Joe Judge to be a long-term answer. He didn't view him as a quick stopgap. He didn't view him as a guy that was going to be here for a couple of years to turn this team around. He brought in a young, inexperienced head coach that he viewed with high upside at 38 years old, and I really do believe that he's going to want to give him more of an opportunity. I'll talk about some of the downfalls that could potentially play out from having that strategy, though, if you're John Mara. Another thing in terms of if you want to talk about pro Joe Judge that I guess I could see, the team fights for him. You could certainly say that. You know, under Pat Shermer, you had guys falling asleep in meetings, and regardless of what you want to say about Judge, for the most part, this team fights each and every week. They give it all that they've got. At least that's the general feeling that I got, right? That I get on a week-to-week basis. You know, when we went back and we watched McAdoo, that team completely folded him on him over the second half of that season. It was a mess with him, right? And you can kind of say the same thing with Pat Shermer. When guys were falling asleep in meetings, didn't know the playbooks, it doesn't seem to be the case with Joe Judge. And one common talking point that a lot of people said at the beginning of the year, myself included, and I think they got off to a sloppy start, was that the New York Giants committed a lot of sloppy penalties. Well, if you're fair and you analyze this as fairly as you can, that is not the case with the New York Giants. The Giants actually have been one of the least penalized teams in football now, and a lot of that goes back to over the last 5 or 6 weeks, they've been more disciplined on that side of the ball. Only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams have committed fewer penalties than the New York Giants. The Giants have committed 67. So from a discipline standpoint, not beating themselves, you could certainly argue that the New York Giants have not done that. And that is something that Joe Judge preaches. Last year, I think they only committed 91 penalties all year. They're kind of trending towards that same area this year. So they have not beaten themselves this year for the most part. Were there individual games? Absolutely. But they've improved upon that throughout the majority of the year. The other thing you could say is it just seems like the team is just generally more competitive than they were under Pat Shermer. When we go up against good teams, there's been several instances, whether it was his first year or this year, where we were fairly competitive. Now, there were certainly games where we were blown out. But those are really the only 2 reasons why I could say to myself, you should absolutely have to keep Joe Judge. And as a matter of fact, I think you could have made a stronger argument to keep Pat Shermer. It had nothing to do with Pat Shermer's coaching ability. It had nothing to do with Pat Shermer's upside. I think actually Joe Judge probably has a higher upside due to the fact that he's younger and he seems to be a guy that is not just, focused on one area of the football team. Pat Shermer, of course, was an offensive coordinator known specifically as a quarterback guy, but the biggest argument for Shermer for me and many other people was the fact that you didn't want to screw up your quarterback, Daniel Jones. He was drafted specifically for the Shermer offense, and you moved on from Shermer just after 1 year with Daniel Jones. There's no real argument nearly as strong as that, at least from my standpoint, other than just not having to flip another head coach after 2 years, that should warrant keeping Joe Judge around. Again, I think Joe Judge is going to stay here, especially some of the things that you've heard from Ian Rappaport. Last week, Ian Rappaport came out and said, basically hinting at the fact that he expected Judge to be back, he expected Gettleman to be fired, and he expected the New York Giants to try to find a general manager that could pair with Joe Judge and work towards a long-term solution. That's basically what he had to say, and that's still what I expect. Why should a loss a week later with Mike Glennon at the quarterback position change my opinion on that? That's what I've thought all along, and that is still what I think will ultimately end up happening. Again, maybe my opinion will change. That doesn't mean that's what I think should happen, because right now, if you ask me today, and I don't think my opinion is going to change on this, I don't think the New York Giants should bring back Joe Judge. And I hate saying that because I'm a guy that does not want to continue to flip things over. And I'm going to say my exact reason why as I continue to go over these reasons. First reason is, like I said or hinted at with the timeout usage, he is completely unprepared. He's completely unprepared in a lot of these games in the way that he looks mismanaged. You see some of the things that he says after the post game. It's an embarrassment as a New York Giant fan. His conservative nature, and it hasn't been a one-time occurrence. It's been a 5, 6-time occurrence. Whereas fans, to us, when you watch other teams, I watch Washington on Monday Night Football, 4th and 2 at their own 45. They're going for it with Taylor Heineke. Joe Judge simply does not show any confidence in his football players. And in today's NFL, you cannot be as conservative as he is. A lot of people place the blame on Jason Garrett. And do I think that it was appropriate to make the change with the offensive play caller? Yeah. You needed to see if it can make a spark. And I'm not going to put this on Freddie Kitchens' plate. Like I said yesterday, he had Mike Glennon at the quarterback. He only had 6 days to prepare the first time around with Daniel Jones, but we have not seen a major change. They only scored 3 points in the first game in the first half against the Philadelphia Eagles. Scored, I think it was, 13 points or so for the game. And yesterday, they couldn't score a touchdown. So the offense has not gotten any better with that change, and I think that was something that, for me to feel like he was definitely should be back, you needed to see an uptick in the offense. And I fear, as a Giants fan, especially with Jones out of this lineup, you're not going to see much progression on the offensive side of the football. I just don't see Jake Fromm coming in here and doing that. But this is what he had to say at the end of the game. And I know Joe Judge is the type of guy that's going to give coach speak, and he's the type of guy that is going to show confidence in his players. This is what he had to say. A lot of things I'm very pleased with in terms of how we competed. But ultimately, we've got to make more plays, take advantage of the opportunities in front of us. And there was a lot of plays yesterday. You know, you think back to the Evan Ingram throw where Ingram completely beat his man and Glennon just missed him. Would have been an easy touchdown. There was a number of other plays in which, had they gone the Giants' way, Giants probably win that game. A play here, a play there. They certainly could have won that football game, and maybe that's what he's talking about there. But what I'll say is, for him to say that he's very pleased in terms of the way that the team competed, for one, for people that praise this team at this point in time for not quitting, I mean, you're a game out of the playoffs going in. These guys are multi-million-dollar athletes. That should be the bare minimum requirement for the team to go out there and give max effort. As fans, we need to expect that. So for me, for a coach to come out and say that he's very pleased that basically the team tried, okay, but the team did not execute, and you continue to mismanage your timeouts. And that's my take on that. The team cannot get in the end zone, and I know it's not all his fault. He doesn't have the talent on the team. I understand the offensive line is a disaster. That goes back to Gettleman. Like I always say with Daniel Jones, life is not always fair in the NFL for these head coaches, and that is going to bring me to my final point. Do I doubt that Joe Judge, I also want to pull this up as well, actually, a quote from Drill Peppers that was kind of a cryptic tweet, and then I'll get into my last point, that you could at least hint at is pointed towards Joe Judge, but you don't know. It could be towards Mike Glennon. It could be towards Freddie Kitchens. Those are really the only 3 guys that this could come from. But this is from a member of the football team. More than likely won't be back next year with the New York Giants, but this is a captain with the Real Peppers. Just because you've been bumped up to first chair in the orchestra doesn't mean you can compose a full symphony. I was also going to pull up the Logan Ryan tweet, but to me, when I watched back the video, it was kind of taken a little bit out of context. This cannot be taken out of context. I don't know if it's a shot at Judge. I don't know if it's a shot at Kitchens, but it doesn't look good that one of your captains is coming out and taking a shot at somebody on the football team and leaving it up for interpretation. But the biggest reason that I think is a major reason why the New York Giants should strongly consider moving on from Joe Judge, if we're going to build this team properly, we need to bring in the best general manager possible. We should not be working to fit a general manager around a head coach that has won, 9, 10 games since he's been with the New York Giants, is incredibly inexperienced, has shown deficiencies in terms of being a head coach. Is it fair for Joe Judge? No. I go back to 2019. After 2019, they should have completely blown it up. You should have had a general manager and a head coach on the same timeline. John Mara, his stubborn ways, didn't do that. This time around, if you're going to fire Dave Gettleman, in my opinion, if I was the owner, I'm starting from scratch, and I'm going to blow this thing up. I'm bringing in a guy from the outside, and I'm bringing in a head coach with him. And I'm going to build this thing together, and I'm going to give them as much time as I would have given Dave Gettleman. That I did give Dave Gettleman, rather, and Pat Shurmur. Like I said, I personally would have not fired those guys in 2019. I would have given them at least another year. I would give these 2 guys they bring in at least 3, if not 4 years to build this thing together. But I cannot limit my hiring potential in terms of bringing in a general manager by force-feeding Joe Judge on them. And what has Joe Judge done, if we're being honest with ourselves, to warrant us having to nitpick and fit a GM that works with him appropriately? To me, the most important part of this team right now is finding the guy that could build it the right way. And up to date, Joe Judge has not proven that, neither has Dave Gettleman. They need to bring in a general manager that can get this team on the right track. You look at teams like the Baltimore Ravens. They draft incredibly every year. The Indianapolis Colts, the New Orleans Saints, the Giants. Yes, you could say that they've made some good draft picks here and there, but it's not working with this football team, not long term. How many guys could you say on this team that you know for sure are going to be here in the next 3-4 years? Maybe 3, maybe 4. The Giants just don't have it. And they've mismanaged the cap situation and everything else. I'm not saying completely blow it up. I definitely think there's building blocks with this football team, and I do think that there's a lot of ways they could go next year, whether or not they're going to stick with Jones, whether or not they'll trade for a quarterback, whether or not they'll bring in a veteran to compete with him, whether or not they'll draft a quarterback, which I'm not on board with. But there's ways that I think they could still have a fairly competitive team next year. The thing with John Mara is that I think is going to be hard for him to do if they elect to do a complete rebuild is sell that to a starving fan base that has not seen winning football really since our last Super Bowl on a consistent basis. We'll have to wait and see how it all plays out. But if it was up to me right now, the way I'm feeling and the way that this New York Giants team has looked this year, and it has nothing to do with just yesterday's loss. Like I said, I expected a loss with Mike Glennon. The main reason why I'd move on from Joe Judge it's not because I don't think Joe Judge may have some potential as a head coach. He's young, he's inexperienced, he could certainly grow and get better. But the main reason why is because he limits my potential to bring in the best possible general manager candidate. Because if I'm a general manager candidate, I am not allowing you to tell me that Joe Judge is going to be my head coach, and I'm not allowing you to tell me that Dan Jones is going to be my quarterback. I'm going to make that decision. And you can't force feed that on the next general manager. If you make it a statement that Joe Judge has to stay on, you're going to limit your hiring candidates. So that's my take on it. What I think will happen, I think it's going to go the way that I said, what I wouldn't do. I think Mara's going to keep Mara, and I think he's going to bring in a guy that's familiar with him, whether it be somebody from in-house or with the New England Patriots, like the report said a week ago from Ian Rappaport. But would I do that? No. I'd bring in the most qualified general managers to build this team the right way, and I'd start in the trenches. We'll see what happens. We got 5 more weeks to go in the NFL season for the New York Giants. Right now, they're 4-8, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are staring at the draft position. As always, guys, if you like what you watch, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.